innovation. We have Nick, who oscillates between education and child protection, and we also have Luca from child protection, and I'm the senior education officer, just to give you an idea of who is here at the other end of the line. Our colleagues in Nairobi, we're very happy to have on the line as well, and we'll introduce them individually in a few minutes. We have how many people so far? Jackie, we have 26, has it gone
36.
Up? 36, okay, rapidly increasing. We have 36 people on the line at the moment, so you're all extremely welcome. The webinar will be structured around a presentation of a session between headquarters and Nairobi, and then we'll have a discussion, and we hope to have very active participation on your side. We'd also like to let you know that the session will be recorded, and a link will be shared with you after the webinar. Right now, we're going to mute everybody to ensure that we have very good audio signals here. And so I hand it over to Alexandra, who's going to begin the presentation. So thank you very much.
Okay, hello everyone, this is Alexandra speaking. We're going to just go through the presentation that you hopefully see on your screen. Just to give you, move the slide to the first slide, I just wanted to review a little bit more in detail how the webinar will look like. We're just going to briefly summarize the education strategy, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, touch on the role of education for children and youth in urban areas, and then focus on really the key principles for refugee education in urban environments. And then at that point, we'll hand it over to our colleagues in Nairobi, who will share with us their case study of refugee education in an urban context. And then hopefully we will have between 20 and 30 minutes left for discussions and questions. So we will be moving through the presentations both here and Nairobi, one after the other. So if you do have any questions, please make a note of them. And if you would like to send us via text message on the chat, that you're more than welcome to do that, and we can also take a note of that and address them after. Okay, so we're just going to move on. The education strategy. So this is probably not anything new to most of you who are participating today. It is a 5-year strategy. It was based on a global review for refugee education that was conducted in 2011, and it's meant to sort of serve as very broad guidance at the global level, which should be translated and contextualized at country level. So countries now that are hosting refugees and have education programs are contextualizing and developing or have already developed their own strategies which address the objectives and approaches in their context. However, just to emphasize that it is a lot of focus on lifelong learning, so looking at widening access to both formal and non-formal education at all levels, not just one level. We're also focusing quite a bit on quality, so not just getting children into school, but actually focusing on what they're learning and making sure, of course, that the protection is granted in the learning spaces and, of course, outside of the learning spaces as well. Education in emergencies, keeping in mind that education should be part of an immediate response, so making sure that we include education in contingency planning as well as having appropriate staffing at the onset of an emergency. In terms of approaches, the broad approaches, of course, we focus a lot on partnerships, in particular working very closely with the Ministry of Education in the countries, but also with our NGO partners, with our UN sister agencies, in particular UNICEF, UNESCO, and with, of course, the refugee community and other organizations. So for sure the partnerships is at the core as an approach. Making sure we have sufficient capacity at all levels is also quite important. Measuring learning outcomes and making sure that we have sufficient data to actually inform our programming and measure the results of our programming. And then finally, innovation, making sure that we are using innovative approaches, partnerships, and also tools that will help us achieve our goals of accessing quality education. So just in broad strokes, this is the goals and approaches. I wanted to move on to getting some participation from your side because it's maybe a bit boring to listen to me speaking. So we wanted to ask you a true or false question related to refugees in urban contexts. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to raise your hands. You'll see the little check the green check on your screen if you think it's true, and an X if you think it's false. So the statement is, refugees in urban settings make up the majority of the refugee population worldwide. True or false? True is the check, false is the X. Getting in some responses, maybe there's some reflection going on. Some X's and checks. More reflection. Majority of checks. So thanks for your participation. We see that the majority of responses are the checks, which is in fact correct, because today we know that 56% of all refugees reside in urban areas, so it certainly is the majority of the refugee population today. We also know that half of all refugees are children. They're below the age of 18 years old, so it's a huge part of the population that we serve and strive to protect, and therefore education is a huge component of what we should be seeking to do. This is probably not news to you as well, but we just want to reiterate the fact that why we support education in urban areas and in general. Of course, education is a basic right. It's included in the 1951 Refugee Convention, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Declaration of Human Rights, and of course various national legal frameworks in your own countries. In addition, we know that we have global commitments such as the Millennium Development Goals, Education for All, and many others. We also know that education plays a very protective role for refugees, both in the short term, particularly in psychosocial support for children, but also in the longer term when we talk about durable solutions. So how can refugees and youth be provided with the knowledge, skills, and certification that will allow them to have an adequate livelihood and well-being in the future, regardless of where they're living. Moving on, we want to ask a question just in general, because oftentimes when we think about programming for refugees in education, we think about camp settings. And we just wanted to point out what is unique actually about education programming in urban settings. So first of all, we just wanted to say that in urban settings, of course, we normally have a variety of education partners, institutions, and opportunities in ways that we don't necessarily have in camps. So there's a lot out there and a lot to map and understand and make use of. There's also additional access to education resources for refugees. So technology is often much more available in urban settings. Access to libraries, reading materials, and many other resources. So this is something that certainly are key advantages in education programming in urban settings. However, there are also some more difficult factors in urban settings, one of which is the fact that refugees are normally very dispersed in an urban environment, difficult to target, difficult to identify, and often there is a very fluid refugee population, so a lot of back and forth movement. And of course, in cities, there are a whole other range of protection risks for both children and youth that aren't necessarily the same risks or in camp settings and might be a little bit more difficult for both UNHCR, its partners, and the government to address. So moving on to the operational guidance. This is a guidance that was developed in 2011, so before the rolling out of the education strategy. And you'll see that it's in line with UNHCR's policy on refugee protection and solutions in urban areas, so it certainly complements the overall strategy. It is available online, and we will provide the link to this at the end of the presentation. And of course, we could go into many details about this operational guidance, but we just wanted to summarize a few of the key principles in the form of questions, actually. So the first thing we wanted to ask is regarding access and quality. So first of all, what range of educational opportunities exist in your urban setting? So have you done a mapping? Do you understand the context and what kinds of partners and opportunities exist? The second question related to that is, what barriers are keeping children out of school? Is it related to a question of school fees? Is it related to overage children or children who don't speak the language of those schools? Is it a question of the national policy environment that doesn't permit refugees to register in schools? So understanding that is quite key. And then, are children and teachers sufficiently prepared to ensure participation in teaching and learning? So when we think about children, we think about, for example, is the equivalency of their education previously recognized? Are they placed at a level where they can adequately learn and progress? For teachers, for example, we want to make sure that are they prepared to actually welcome refugees into their classrooms? Do they understand the background and the various protection issues facing refugee children? These are some of the questions regarding access and quality. For protection, the key questions we have here, is the learning environment safe? So both inside the school and outside the school, is it a safe environment for children? Is there an absence of sexual abuse, exploitation, corporal punishment, etc.? So many of the things we normally think of also apply when thinking about the learning environment. Secondly, are the needs of vulnerable groups considered and addressed? So no different from camp settings, are we considering the specific needs of girls, children with disabilities, or youth with disabilities, unaccompanied, separated children, etc.? So this is another key question that we should ask. And then finally, is education protective beyond the school? So for example, are the school uniforms or identity documents that schools are providing refugee children, are they actually helping to promote protection beyond the school itself? In terms of integration, partnerships, and participation, one key question we want to ask is education for refugees sustainable and accredited? So we understand very well that UNHCR is a humanitarian organization. Our assistance should be temporary. So what are we doing to integrate into national systems so that we don't have parallel systems set up that cannot be sustained and are not also accredited with a curriculum that's recognized by a Ministry of Education that results in certification that can be recognized? Are all of the potential education partners mapped? So we talked about that before, but also how are we engaging them? Is there a coordination mechanism that we have set in place to coordinate the actors, or are we working with the Ministry of Education to actually integrate into existing structures of coordination? How is the community engaged in supporting refugee education? Are they engaged at all? Are parents, refugee parents, included in parent-teachers associations? And how are they involved in the planning and implementation and monitoring of education programs? How is assistance benefiting both refugees and the host population, and also contributing to peaceful coexistence? So you'll see in the operational guidelines that one of our key principles is to make sure that the assistance we provide in urban settings is complementary to the national system. So it doesn't just target the assistance for refugees, but it's actually taking a holistic approach and trying to build up the national system, and of course in collaboration with other development partners as well. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, again, a huge area, but some key questions we want to ask ourselves. First of all, do you know how many refugees are out of school? This is a basic question, and if we don't, then how can we get that data? Are there verification exercises that are done that we can also update education data on a regular basis? Do you have enrollment, attendance, and exam results, which are some of the basic things that we would want to know from refugee children or youth who are enrolled in schools? And then finally, considering all of this, do you have the adequate data necessary for proper planning and accurate planning? So if you do have an education program in an urban area, certainly we hope that you also have access to the kind of data that is needed for the proper planning and follow-up. So that is very broadly the presentation that we have. We wanted to move on quite quickly to our colleagues in Nairobi. We have, I will let them also confirm who is on the line, but we have our colleagues Joyce Munyao and Daniel Mariti, and so they've been kind enough to also share with us their experience of refugee education in Nairobi. So we will hand it over to Nairobi at this time. Thank you.
Great, so we're going to test just to make sure that Joyce is able to come back in on her line. So if we can unmute Joyce.
Yes, now she's unmuted.
Wonderful. Joyce, do you want to give an introduction of who is present? unable to hear you. Can you please try to speak up?
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Great, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Can you hear Joyce? Hello? Hello, Joyce speaking. Can you hear Joyce? Hello? Alexander, can you hear Joyce?
No, we can't hear from this end.
But can you hear Joyce?
No, we cannot hear Joyce.
Let me call and come this time so that you can hear.
Joyce is speaking.
Sorry, is this Daniel?
No, this is George. Let me just tell him to come.
Okay, great. So, in the meantime, as we wait for Nairobi to get on board, if anyone has any initial questions.
Here we are, here we are.
Can you hear us now, Alessandra?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead. If you want to start with the introduction, that would be great. Who's at your table?
Okay, we are here with Daniel, who is our education assistant. We have George, who has been working also in education in Nairobi for a long time, as well as Zahara. And we have our new colleague, Margaret, who has joined us recently for the education program as well. So we are going to begin now. Daniel is going to go over our presentation, and then we will hand it over to you.
Hi, Alexandra. This is Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
So, colleagues, welcome. My name is Daniel. I'm a community services assistant. I'll take you through the education model in Kenya for the Urban Refugee Program. Okay, like you can see from your slides there, the Kenya hosts about 583,197 registered refugees from Somalia, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Congo, Eritrea, and Burundi. Basically, we have two camps, one in Kakuma and one in Dadaab. And we have about 50,541 refugees residing in Nairobi. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
So basically, the protection environment in Nairobi for the refugees has been quite good until the last few years, around 2012, when we had these invasions from the terror group in Somalia called Al-Shabaab, and then the government instituted some local measures that targeted on refugees and basically saying that the refugees should go back to the camps. And the Kenya government, by the way, has the incumbent policy that says that all the refugees should reside in these two major camps, that is Kakuma and Dadaab. So in the last 2 years, we've been having the protection environment for the urban refugees really constrained because of these security measures taken by the government, where most of our beneficiaries were actually rounded up and even taken back to the camp. But the situation has been improving over the last 6 months, and we can basically say that the protection environment has been improving. But the worry is that the attacks that have been happening in Kenyan regions continue to threaten the refugee protection environment, because basically the government has an idea that refugees are also involved in these attacks happening in Kenya. And we've been having a problem, especially with our Somali refugees who are rounded up, especially in the areas where we have majority Somali refugees. But we are hoping that the government will eventually stop this crackdown and ensure that all the refugees are safe in Nairobi. So we have domesticated various legal frameworks in Kenya that allows our refugees to have access to education. As a signatory to the 1951 Convention, we have various laws that we have domesticated here in Kenya that allows all the children to have access to education, and that includes all the refugees. And basically, we have the Kenyan Constitution, we have the 2001 Children's Act, the 2006 Refugee Act, and the 2013 Education Act. Just to point out that the 2013 Education Act broadened the category for the basic education to include the secondary education, and so that all our refugees are entitled to access to early childhood education, primary education, and then secondary education, all the way to tertiary education. So we've domesticated these laws in Kenya, and so there is no discrimination. Our refugees are not discriminated with regard to access to education at all levels, from ECD all the way to tertiary education. The main issue that we have is that we do not have a specific policy within the Ministry of Education that deals with refugee education. But 2 years ago, UNHCR and education partners engaged the Ministry of Education in coming up with a concept note that basically looked at the issues surrounding the challenges that the refugees go through with regard to documentation and the requirement for them joining the education institution in Kenya. So the concept was developed together with the Ministry of Education, education partners, and UNHCR, and it is pending approval in the Ministry of Education. And thereafter, after the concept was developed, by the way, Dadaab refugee camp was able to come up with the education strategy for Dadaab, and which the Ministry of Education participated in launching, and we congratulate the government for taking a lead role in launching the education strategy for Dadaab. What is happening now is that we are also having the urban education strategy that we hope the Ministry of Education will also participate in launching by the end of this year, hopefully, and we are engaging them very robustly. The other thing is that in Kenya we have the universal basic education, where all the children have the right to access basic education, that is primary and secondary education. This has resulted into some problems here and there because of the overcrowding in our institutions, and we have this problem of teacher shortages. Just to quote the figures, for Nairobi, for example, we have a shortage of 409 teachers in primary education and about 649 for secondary education, owing to the overwhelming numbers that are coming to this institution. Moving forward, you have the numbers there that you can see, and as you can see that access to primary education is boosted in a big way because of the government's policy of allowing all the children to have access to primary education. We still have a few problems with the ECD because we are not able to get all the data that we need, especially from the private ECD institutions that we have in Nairobi. What we have for the 436 is for the public primary schools, but we need to move forward and also engage the private ECDs that we have in Nairobi. We've not been able to capture that information. And also for secondary, what you see here is for the students that we are sponsoring, basically those students who have UNHCR sponsorship. For tertiary education, we also have a problem because 181, these are DAFI students, who about 124 are the beneficiaries of DAFI scholarship, plus about 15 who are sponsored by JRS, who is our education partner, and also the DRC, Danish Refugee Council, who also sponsors about 5 students. Next. Good practices. The Nairobi Urban Refugee Education, like I said, 2 years ago, UNHCR and the education partners came together and formulated a plan of how they are going to execute various activities in the education sector with the partners, basically to increase the access for all levels of education, starting from the ECD, primary and secondary and tertiary education. We came up with the various activities that will be undertaken from 2013 to 2016. We wanted to have a measurable forum where we are able to say whether we are making progress, and we are moving forward with the Ministry of Education to have this one, accepted by the Ministry of Education. We moved forward, and at the moment, we are waiting for the feedback from the Ministry of Education to launch the urban education strategy for Nairobi. On partnership for tertiary education, we've signed an MOU with 3 public universities, which has enabled us to make savings, especially on the charges that are charged for the external students coming from non-East African students. And so we were able to make savings that allowed us, out of this partnership with these 3 public institutions, we were able to enroll additional 37 students for DAFI scholarship. We also have been doing the sensitization of teachers and schools management to basically enlighten them on the issues of refugees. Refugees come from difficult backgrounds, and for the ones who eventually make it come to Nairobi and other urban centers, their situations may not be understood by the school management and other institutions. So we've been carrying out the training to induct the teachers and the management of the schools on the plight of the refugees and how their background make them a special group that should be considered for a special treatment in the education system here in Kenya. We also found that the government, these institutions actually have gone ahead to carry out some interventions to help the students be safe, especially during the crackdown that I had spoken about earlier, when we had the government moving in to force the refugees to go back to the camp. Some of these institutions came up with good practices to issue the students with the identification documents that allowed them to come to schools and go back to their homes safely, because they gave them the letters and ID cards that allowed them not to be arrested by the authorities. The other thing is that we also have these adult literacy centers that all the refugees who are interested in doing businesses, they're able to go and learn languages and literacy classes that allow them to understand business concepts, and they're also able to benefit from our loans that we give to the livelihood program here in UNHCR Nairobi, to do business and to be able to support their families. We've also engaged the authorities, the county education office, in the collecting of data from the public primary schools and ECDs. We've supported this exercise through making sure that logistical part of moving up through the period when the exercise is carried out is made is smooth, basically to support the logistics. For example, supporting the officers who are doing the actual data collection with the airtime and others to make sure that they are able to capture the data for the public primary schools. I must insist, this is for the public primary schools. We've not been able to venture into the other private and what we call non-formal institutions, which are so many, anyway, about 1,000 plus. But we hope that in the coming year we'll be able to engage the county education office to be able to capture a number of refugees who are in private and the non-formal institutions here in Nairobi. Next. We have a bit of challenges here and there, and to start with, the refugee education programming is underfunded. That's a fact. For example, for ECD, where we support about less than 200 students, both for our partner, JRS, Refugee Services, and UNHCR. Combined, we've been able to support about 180 students, but the applications that we received were about almost 500. And these are very, very vulnerable children, but we could only support about 180. So you can see the gap that is there. Okay, lack of data on refugee learners, like I mentioned earlier, from private primary schools, private ECD institutions. We've not been able to capture this information, which makes it also difficult for our partners to plan adequately. On the other hand, also for secondary schools, we've not been able to capture a proper data on secondary students that we have, apart from the ones that we support and pay for their support. We also have the non-formal schools, which are so many of them, and they are spread across the city. But unfortunately, because of so many issues, challenges, we've not been able to capture the number of refugee students attending these non-formal schools. But we know they are there. So the other thing is that national schools are overstretched, because, like I said, the basic education, which was expanded now to include the secondary education, is free in Kenya. And so you have a lot of students in these schools. The facilities are not expanding. You have overcrowded classrooms where you have, like I mentioned, challenges with the number of teachers who are attending to these schools. The facilities in the schools are also another challenge, and also they say it's free primary education, for example, but you have a lot of challenges because the schools are charging the refugee parents additional costs to cater for example, if you have a watchman in your school, the board of management come together and they say that each parent should pay a certain amount of money. If there is free primary education, the feeding program, where the children are able to get some meals in the school, then they need firewood to be able to cook this food, and these charges are now passed on to the parents. So you find that at the end of the day, the parent is having to pay extra money so that their children can be accommodated in these schools, and yet we are saying that we have free primary education. On coordination, then we find that there are some issues because recently we had our new constitution that basically gave various roles to the county. but we have a few teething problems where that initially for Nairobi, for example, we had the county, the city education was in charge of primary and secondary education. According to the new constitution, now this has been moved to the national government. So these teething problems have resulted into challenges with regard to the reporting line, because things have not been streamlined. This one we can actually say that it's a problem of our new constitution. Things have not been properly streamlined, and there is a back and forth, back and forth communications with regard to small issues, and especially on reporting, because the issues have not been sorted out between now the national government, which is supposed to take over secondary education and tertiary education, and the county education office in Nairobi. The other thing is the protection risk for urban youth. This one is regard to the, for example, our Somali refugees who are basically, because of the security situation that is happening in our country. Like I said, the Al-Shabaab terror group is basically Somali, and then when our security people are conducting these patrols in the town, then they tend to target on our Somali refugees basically, and so you'll find that there are protection risks for the Somalis, so to speak, and especially when these attacks in Kenya continues to take place. Next.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel and the Nairobi team, for that very interesting presentation on some of the good practices and also challenges, which I'm sure many of the listeners are also sharing in their context. So I just wanted to show one last slide before we hand it over for other participants to comment or ask questions. And this is just a slide, again, we will share this with you afterwards, but about the key documents and media that you can access on this view. The operational guidance, of course, we've been over. There's a good practice database for urban refugees that you can have a look at, a small film clip on access to education in Nairobi. There's also an Urban Refugee Learning Program, which is an e-learning course on UNHCR's Learn and Connect platform. And finally, a Safe Learning Environment e-learning course as well, which is also accessible on Learn and Connect. So we would like to encourage listeners, if you are not familiar with these tools, to please also use them and share them with your partners and colleagues. So we just wanted to actually, if you have questions or you want to make a comment, if you could raise your hand, but we will start off by posing a question in relation to the operational guidance, because we would like to know, this document came out in 2011. We are quite curious how familiar you are with this guidance and how you've actually used the guidance to help promote access to education for refugees in your environment. So if maybe you could address that question as well. And if you do speak, please share with us before you speak your name, where you're calling from, and your organization. That would be very helpful.
So if you'd like to address, if you can just click on the raise hand button and we'll be sure to unmute you. Wonderful. Sonia Gomez, please go ahead. Sonia? Hi, Sonia. Do you have a question for us? Okay, Sonia, we can't hear you. So if you want to type your question to us, please go ahead. We'll put you back on mute. If anyone else would like to respond to the question regarding the guidelines, I see that we've got Joyce up here who might want to comment further. Joyce in Nairobi?
Yes, I just wanted to allow my colleagues who have worked for a long time in the Nairobi program to make a few additions to the presentation that we have made. If you will allow us, I will have George and Zahara just throw in one or two comments.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Once again, my name is George. I'm the Assistant Livelihood Officer in Nairobi. Before taking over livelihood activities, I was doing education. I would like to add some few points and as well explain the linkage between livelihood and education and how we're working together towards that. One, on partnerships. It's been a long walk for us to be where we are here, as already said by my colleague Daniel. Partnerships has been developed with the Ministry of Education, UNICEF, UNESCO, the county government, the communities, universities, and schools. And this has enabled us achieve most of the objectives that we keep on to set. Again, the partnership has also helped us, or rather helped us to develop the concept that you has already mentioned, the concept that is ongoing. We received a lot of support from the ministry. Actually, it was led by the ministry. We had the UNICEF, UNESCO, and other partners actively participating. The linkage that we have with livelihoods, or rather education and livelihoods, is one, we do participate in activities implemented by education, especially post-secondary school activities like DAFI scholarship, in giving them information about access to work permits, and trying to give them information about what is in the market or what are the marketable areas. We as well hold joint meetings, or rather coordination meetings, with between livelihoods and education, and this is done monthly.
George, we can't hear you any longer. Are you still there? Okay, I think we've lost them for a moment as we try to get them connected.
Actually, we see two colleagues from Malaysia who are participating in the webinar. I'm wondering if Fairuz or Jiaying, if you could share with us maybe the experience of how you've come to address some of the challenges in the context of Kuala Lumpur, where there's a very difficult policy environment and refugees do not have access to schools, and some of the maybe innovative ways that you've tried to address those challenges with the others. So we will give you access to the microphone here. So Fairuz, yeah.
Hi, Alexandra and other colleagues. So in Malaysia, the solution here is a bit difficult in the sense that refugees are not recognized by the government. So in terms of our relationship with the government as well, it's very difficult for us to get them on board and give us some support. So what we have done so far is that in terms of communicating with the learning centers, we are trying to implement an open email system where the refugee learning centers can report directly to us via the internet. That's one thing. And what else? That's on top of my mind right now.
Maybe the volunteer is another interesting one that to share.
Oh yes. So we also have a network of volunteers who actually sign up with us and help us in terms of in terms of teaching at the learning centers. So for example, we have around 700 volunteers, but almost 400 of them actually dedicate their time to teach at the learning centers. So we have a unit in our office where they coordinate the timing of the volunteers to go to the learning centers and help and support them, and I mean in terms of giving time to teach them. I think that's the volunteer part. What else do I miss?
No, you got it. Thanks so much, Fairuz.
Sorry, thanks.
Oh, no, thank you very much for that. We have a question, potentially from Kareem Rashini. I'll unmute you. Would you like to add a question? Kareem?
Someone who was speaking in the chat. It's a personal chat.
We don't have a mic. All right, Kareem, I think you might have asked us a question. We're just going to go to the chat and see.
Sure. Let's in the meantime ask another question. And this time I'll hand it over to my colleague Nick, who is dealing with youth, to also ask a question about youth in urban environments, particularly on the non-formal education side.
So I thought it was very interesting the way that the colleagues in Nairobi described the way that they work. They collaborate and work together with the colleagues in livelihoods, and this integrated approach to working with the young people in urban environments is quite essential. And I wondered if anybody had other experiences of integration of education, livelihoods, and other initiatives for young people in urban environments that they'd like to share with us.
Thanks, Nick. So if anyone does have something to share in response to Nick's question, please raise your hands. So, Hoda, we see you have your hand raised. Please go ahead and tell us where you're from, Hoda.
Hoda, if you're unable to join via the audio, if you just want to write your message in the chat, we can pick it up from there. Hoda? All right, well, we tried to get the question from Hoda. We also saw a message from Luna that was requesting that we do share good practices that are happening in the urban context. So I think we got some great examples from both Kenya and from Malaysia. And I would like to ask other colleagues if you could please also give us some examples of good practices and perhaps innovative approaches that you've taken to addressing the issue of urban refugees and education. So any unique approaches that you are trying in your operations and what has been particularly effective?
Okay, so we are trying to get a full question. Sorry, we see some more hands. Jaying from Malaysia. Go ahead, Jia.
Hi, thank you, Alexandra.
You're welcome.
Hello?
Go ahead. We can hear you. Please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, I would just like to add on to what Faris said earlier. Actually, at the moment, we have a few international schools that are working with the learning centers as well, where they get either their teachers or their students to go into the school and have some activities with the students in the learning centers. So sometimes they go in once a week or twice a week, depending on the international schools. And some international schools are working with like almost 10 learning centers at the moment. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
That is one of it. Yeah. You're welcome. That's all.
Thanks very much, Yaying. I think it's a very good example of how you're drawing on the existing resources and international schools as being a very high quality in order to also allow refugees to benefit from that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Joyce, I think we have you back online or audio. Would you like to say something? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just had my colleague Zahara, who had not thrown in her comments before we went off, so I will just let her have one moment.
Hi Jennifer, my name is Zahara Motaku. I work in Community Services, Senior Community Services Assistant. One thing I wanted to add to our conversation, I know my colleague Daniel and George have said it all. It's just like I wanted to say that the reason that why we succeeded to implement education in the urban area, and especially primary education, it's because we support through our education implementing partners. We support these schools with material assistance, like for example, desks and books. What we did, we conducted a survey and we identified some of the schools with urgent needs, and through the partners, we supported the schools with as I've said, desks and books. And not only do we support refugee children, we also support some vulnerable senior children. And also, I wanted to add that during the government directive, with so many refugees relocating to the camp, there are those who also relocated to other urban areas, like, for example, Mombasa, which currently, according to the Department of Refugee Affairs, they've registered about 19,000 refugees. So we've had missions going to Mombasa, and the recommendation is in 2015, we see if we can start implementing education also around Mombasa. Thank you.
Okay, that's all we wanted.
Go ahead.
No, that's all from our side. We just wanted to add those comments. We are listening to other colleagues' comments.
Wonderful, thank you. And we've had a comment coming from South Africa in relation to efforts from JRS, who in South Africa has worked to educate individual schools about the refugee rights to education within South African law and help to obtain resources to expand access to these individuals, which I think is a great example of an approach that can be taken to create greater advocacy efforts, but also to actually mobilize resources for support. Are there any further examples people would like to share?
This is Alexandra again. I'd also just like to ask for any good practices that you have on sensitization and awareness raising. Considering the issues surrounding data collection and how difficult it is to know the educational status of children, how do you use community networks and leaders and individuals or media or technology to actually say messages related to education and promote education and going to school? So if anyone has any good practices they can share with the group, that would be great.
to add your comment?
And tell us where you're calling from and which organization?
Please go ahead. Okay, we're going to go down, Roberto, while we try to get your audio to work. We'll go down here. To Yannick, please go ahead. Yannick from Chad, can you hear us? Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Great. Do you have a question?
From Sarah. It's a good
Yes?
opportunity that you are making. It's a good opportunity to share what we are sharing now about the for us, that is a big challenge that we are facing in Urban. Because at the beginning we had a little big number of refugees in less than 1 year, the number, yes, you're getting me. I'm saying, it's a good opportunity that we have. What is going on? The question is to, I noticed one challenge. The challenge was underfunding of something that they have there. How they are doing to address that type of challenge.
Thank you for that, Yannick. Yannick was calling from Chad, from N'Djamena, where there is also a refugee education program. And the question was raised about funding. If there's underfunding, how do we actually address that issue? Very good question. I think a lot of us deal with that question very generally for education. But I think at least from our side, we would say, first of all, try as much as possible to make sure you have the data available in order to make a case for why you should be supporting refugee education in urban context. So have you done a needs assessment? Do you understand what the individual needs are? And sometimes it's not a matter of having to provide assistance. It's really understanding what the coping mechanisms are of the refugees in urban environments, and then identifying perhaps the most vulnerable groups or which schools to assist, etc. So having the data and some kind of mapping and needs assessment is quite essential. And then taking that to advocacy. So how are we advocating internally for resource mobilization? How are we also mobilizing our partners, the Ministry of Education and other actors, including refugee communities themselves, who also come in, contribute, and help to promote access to education. So it's also having a holistic approach in the way that we're advocating for inclusion. If anyone else has anything to add on that point, please raise your hand.
And we'll open it up now to Elena. Elena, if you have a
Hello?
question, please go ahead. Yep.
You hear us?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Then I just wanted to introduce some of Armenia's experience. I'm Program Secretary of Armenia, here in my office. And in Armenia, both constitution and refugee law allow for refugees and asylum seekers to have free primary and secondary education in Armenia. However, in practice, there may be some difficulties because of language barrier and financial shortages that students sometimes have. So the other specificity that Armenia has related to Syrian refugees is that most of them are ethnic Armenians, and they require good, the integration process of them is more or less successful. However, there is still the language barrier. They speak different kind of Armenian than the locals, and children have difficulties at school. And UNHCR somehow tries to address this issue. We support the organization of after-school classes for children who have language problems, and they stay after classes and benefit from this language lesson. And also, parents might get a very small contribution for covering the travel expenses for the children in very vulnerable families. But what is very, very problematic in Armenia is the kindergartens, which are overcrowded. The request for kindergarten in Armenia is so high compared to the available functioning government-led kindergartens. And currently, we are also trying to negotiate with the government to try to face this issue and solve it. We also have some 3 DAFI students, but unfortunately, we cannot go further with it. Support because, as far as we know, the program is strictly limited to de jure refugee status holders, which is not the case with Syrian refugees. Well, at this moment, I think that's it. If something else, I will come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellen, from Armenia. I think your points are very well taken, particularly how you've dealt with the barrier of language for Syrian refugees by organizing after-school classes, and also targeting the most vulnerable children by covering some of their travel expenses. So we have another question or comment. I believe we have a question for Nairobi coming from Aisha from Yemen. Aisha, we'll give you the floor. Just 1 second. Go ahead, Aisha. Can you hear us and speak?
Yes, thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, from the presentation, I noticed that it's only 5% who go to secondary school, and only with sponsorship. What children do after primary school? What are the alternatives they have?
Thanks, Aisha, for that question. Colleagues in Nairobi, we will give you the floor to respond to that. A question on secondary education and what the youth are doing after primary. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Alexandra. Like I had mentioned, we are not able to capture all the data for secondary education in the first place, because what we have is only what we are able to sponsor for a few vulnerable cases that are referred through our partners, and also those who come directly to UNHCR. But we have other chances for these students who graduate from primary education, because we have livelihood and vocational training that are available for these students. And maybe, because I have the floor, maybe I can comment on some other good practices that we had left out. I know this is not related to the question. I had wanted to mention about we have an e-lab for the students who are doing exams for the primary education, where they are able to connect online and be able to access reading materials. And they're able to do this through their cell phone, through their parents' cell phones. This one is an initiative of our new incoming education partner, Xavier Project, who will be taking over from 2015. They have what they're calling an e-lab, and our students both in primary and secondary education, will be able to access revision materials through their phone, through their parents' phone, and then this will help them to, during free time, to be able to revise online, and it's free. It's also free of charge. They don't have to pay anything. So I thought I should add that from the good practices that we have in Nairobi at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Daniel, for those comments, and Aisha for your question. Just highlighting the issue, it seems to be a trend that we only can understand the children that are in school through the assistance that we're providing. In other words, we don't know how many children are necessarily outside of those structures because we're not providing assistance. So thinking more creatively about how we can collect data for children that are not necessarily receiving assistance but are still accessing school, and this data is very important. So how, for example, are we working with the National Ministry of Education data systems to perhaps collaborate with them so that they can collect this data and share with UNHCR and partners. So maybe thinking a little bit more innovatively of how we can collect data in these challenging settings.
Great. We're going to go to Stephen, who I believe has a question. Stephen, please go ahead. Stephen, can you hear us? All right, we'll hold for a moment and we'll go down to Venna. Venna, do you have a question or a comment to add?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Banan from Lebanon. I work in the Tripoli sub-office for the Syrian emergency. So I just wanted to comment more about how to promote access to education. More than, of course, working with the Ministry of Education, the IPs and OPs, and other UN agencies. Here in Lebanon, we have started an initiative that was mostly engaging the refugee community and we have created specialized education refugee outreach volunteers. And in this system, it was very much easy for us to outreach to the community and promote the access to education for everyone. Also, this is helping us for the data collection, for example, collecting data on the out-of-school children and the challenges faced mostly in the areas. So the role of the refugees in assisting and supporting us was very important, and the initiative of refugee outreach volunteers was very successful in our area.
Thank you very much, Vanan, for that good practice, looking at outreach volunteers, which is a very innovative practice. Very good.
There's one more question that we had through the discussion. We had a question earlier from Fernando, which really picked up on what Alexandra mentioned around monitoring and data. But we have another question that is looking at Latin America and wondering whether the guidance has been implemented within this region, and if there are examples of good practices. So if there's anyone online that would like to give an example at the moment, please raise your hand. But as a follow-up to this webinar as well, we'll be sending out an email, and we would like to invite you to respond by sharing other examples of good practices in urban contexts. So anyone from Latin America who would like to respond to creative practices or how they've been able to implement the program. Great. Okay, so I don't see any hands regarding Latin America, so we'll invite you to submit those via email. But we've got another question on the discussion that's going towards looking at Kenya.
Yes, I see that there is a question from Jennifer. stating that in September 2012, a joint assessment was conducted but as of April 2013, it was still a draft. And George, before when he spoke, stated that in a monthly meeting at Geneva had not approved it yet. Has the document be approved, and if so, is it now the Nairobi Urban Refugee Association strategy, the Nairobi team mentioned it, and it is pending approval from the Ministry of Education in Kenya? Is it published, and where we can find it?
Great. So we'll open up the floor to Nairobi, if you would like to comment.
Maybe the person who is asking the question can repeat it was not well received from our end. Maybe he can repeat.
Okay, so the question is, in September 2012, a joint assessment was conducted. But as April 2013, it was still a draft, and George started in a monthly meeting that Geneva had not approved it yet. Has that document be approved? And so, it is now the Nairobi Urban Refugee Education strategy, the Nairobi team mentioned it, and it is pending approval from the Ministry of Education. If it is published, where can we find it?
So go ahead, Nairobi, if you're able to respond.
We were struggling to hear, but let me hope this is how I've heard it correctly. There are two documents that I presume is talking about. One is the joint assessment we did prior to developing the education strategy, of which the assessment was refined, and it led to the development of the strategy, which is now complete, just awaiting launching with the Ministry of Education. That's one. Two, the second document that we developed was the concept that we did with the Ministry of Education, and the concept is also in its final phases. It's only awaiting some approval within the Ministry of Education. I hope my points are clear.
Thank you very much, George, for that input.
Great. And as we said, I think this is just the starting of this conversation, and we really look forward to hearing from all of you in terms of good practices, both regarding children and youth and innovative approaches that you're taking to addressing urban education. So we really do invite you to share with us your stories, and we will send a follow-up email that will include the resources that we've shared here today and the contact information to share on your good practices.
And please do feel free to share with us any questions or concerns that you have, and we can always have a separate call with you as well to discuss more in depth. So thank you very much. On behalf of the Education Unit at headquarters, we'd like to really appreciate everyone's participation and wish you a very good rest of the day or evening.
Yes, and a special thank you to Kenya for their participation in sharing their examples.
And also to the Global Learning Center for hosting this webinar.
All right, wonderful, everyone. Thank you very much.
So